I'm Jim Collison, and live from our virtual studios around the world, or at least today here in the United States. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on January 29th, 2021. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, I'd love to have you join us in our chat room. There's a link right above me there that'll take you to it. Just sign in with your Google account. Join us in chat. Let us know where you're listening from. If you're listening after the fact, and that's okay, many more of you listen to the recorded version either as a podcast or on YouTube, and you have questions, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us as a podcast. Just search Gallup Webcast in any podcast player, and find us on YouTube by searching CliftonStrengths. Subscribe in all those places. Dr. Jaclynn Robinson is our host today. She works as a learning and development consultant at Gallup. Jaclynn, always great to be with you on Call to Coach. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Good.
Thank you much.
Great to have you. We are in part 3 of a 6-part series. We're talking about successful leadership. We talked about inspiring leaders in the very first week. In the second week, we talked about the value of self-awareness. And I think for a lot of coaches, we kind of zeroed in on kind of why they do what they do around coaching. We kind of want to avoid, I think sometimes we get into this name it mentality when we think about strengths. We just want to talk about what they are and maybe not always zero in on the implementation of making decisions, right? Because that's really what it comes down to. And leaders oftentimes have to make the most difficult decisions in making them in the context or the framework of their individual themes, right? Beyond just naming them, but really talking about claiming and aiming them as well, I think is really important. Where do leaders kind of seek this support? I mean, if we're going to get real practical for a little bit, in what areas do they really need this support, do you think?
I'm glad you brought up the naming piece, because I think it is easy to get stuck there. And once you're in that executive coaching phase, they want to get more into the meat and the challenges that they experience. So I would say what comes up the absolute most when I'm coaching is negotiations. They've got a decision that they need to make. They need to negotiate it with senior leadership, or it's having those, what I like to call, courageous conversations. It's a tough conversation that they might have to have with somebody in that decision-making process, or it's related to, difficult personalities, challenging personalities, whether it's an employee or someone that they work laterally with. It's just a fellow colleague, and they have to navigate in a more tactical way, around that personality. What else comes to mind for me? Sometimes it's just related to organizational restructuring too. It's a decision. It's theirs or it's someone else's, but that triggers decisions that they then have to make. So those come up, I would say, most frequently.
Yeah, those are really the hardest part in a lot of cases of the job managing. I think a lot of people, we've been kind of taught, like if I go to school, I learn how to do something, I take a job, and then I work that job for a while, and then I become a manager. Like that's kind of we know from our research that idea of talent, the talent that it takes to be a manager, is actually its own talent. It's we don't always take the best salespeople and make them sales managers. That can't happen, right? But that's not what we do. And then the job responsibilities are often very stressful for managers. This is why we see the disengagement in our managers number that we do. Jaclynn, when we think about, okay, so I'm a manager, I've got these 5, and maybe I've got access to my all 34 report. And let's think about in some of your coaching, as you think about managing leaders, give us a little bit of an example, maybe just even in a coaching situation, is how you might approach, I'm taking these themes and then maybe applying them to these difficult conversations or a difficult personality. Can you give us a little example of that?
That's where having that naming conversation early on is helpful, maybe the first 1 or 2 sessions, so they have that foundation, and then helping them think through what I tend to do. Let's say there's one that comes to mind, actually a couple that come to mind, and they have to have courageous conversations. If they lead with deliberative and analytical and high discipline, then what I might ask is, when have you been successful previously whenever you've had to hold a conversation that felt more difficult? And some might say, well, I practice that repetitive practice of just playing it in my mind and the different scenarios that could come forth support me, because then I feel well prepared going in. So it's that reminder, it's that prompt. Oh, that worked before. Okay, let's see if we can just implement that this next time around. And then we serve as accountability partners to say, how did that work? Did it work effectively? If so, I'm going to keep that in my coaching brain. So when that comes up again, I can remind you of what seemed to work before. So that works. It really is playing into their themes to say, what are you finding? I find a lot also have high harmony. Specifically, that I've been coaching lately too, a number of them have high harmony. So they're feeling out the conflict. They see how maybe a couple of different teams aren't getting along, or they might have difficulty working with someone else. And so then I play to them and say, what's the common ground that you're finding with this person? What do you both agree on? So without calling out harmony specifically, you can really just start to break down what that theme is and incorporate it into your coaching questions.
Yeah, I think you're right in that. Even trying to tie those successful outcomes to those talent traits that exist underneath that umbrella of harmony, getting beyond just the harmony label and saying, hey, harmony brings these kinds of things. Here's how it's been successful for you. Now, how do we tie it to some actions you have to take? Coaches are always asking us for questions like, what kind of questions can I ask? So as we're getting to the concerns of managers, what kind of questions can coaches ask to kind of get to this point?
Yeah, I've got three that are my favorite, and they follow one another. So the first is, what are your three biggest priorities right now? And I have them work through that. And then the second follow-up question is, what barriers do you foresee with those priorities? And then they tend to share out whatever that challenge or barrier is. And then that next follow-up question is, how can I support you? So let them share out what they need from us, as opposed to putting so much pressure on yourself to try to come up with that solution or solve the problem for them, especially if that's what you feel you're working on right now, is not solving their problem, but really being the guide. Asking, how can I support you? Now that they've walked through priorities and challenges is a great way to understand if they just want you to be an accountability partner, if they want you to, help them work through a negotiation or a challenging personality or org restructuring.
When you're coaching leaders and managers, do you have a set of questions that you use every time? Do you tailor them kind of based on what you know? If you were going to give some coaching advice on coaching managers in this area, how do you approach it?
Yeah, this is probably thinking about themes. It's probably my strategic. I like being in the session and in the moment. That helps me the best in just being able to be more attuned to what they want. And we talk about this in our coaching courses too, but you can prep and have questions prepared, but then you might end up scrapping them all together because something else comes up. So what I tend to do, just to have a little bit of insight into what that next conversation might hold for us, is at the close of a session, say, what would you like to talk about in our next session? Is there anything specific you want me to start noodling over that can support us? And then they'll share out or say, this might be coming up. It might be a topic of interest, or they know exactly what they want to talk about. Maybe they have high discipline or high focus and there's a plan in mind. Or they just say, let's just see where the wind takes us.
Okay. Yeah. And so it kind of varies. So structure and agility, right? Having both kind of both and like we need the structure. We can't just go in flying blind, but to be able to move from that structure pretty quickly. I love that last question of, so what do we need to talk about next time? I think there's a lot of brilliance in bringing that in at the end, especially with leaders. What are other ways we can support? We know our leaders are under fire at this point, and I don't think because it's 2021, it's going to get any easier. So what are some ways we, as coaches, we can support our leaders and managers?
I've got a few in mind here. So I've got what I've kind of considered my big four. So the first is really leaning into the talent themes. Helping them understand what the themes are, and then helping them study their successes in adverse situations. So if you're not asking those questions, what are your priorities? What challenges do you foresee? And how can I support you? When they come to you and they just share out that they're going through something difficult, how can we lean into their themes and study success? So go back to what worked before, and are there any ways they can take some of those best practices and apply it in the here and now? A second one that I wrote down was serve as an accountability partner. They have so much on their plates that oftentimes they just forget what works. And we all do that. We're all very guilty of doing that. They're in high stakes situations oftentimes. And so just being an accountability partner for them and reminding them of what they'd mentioned had worked previously can be very helpful. The third one that I wrote down was provide materials like quick reads or podcasts. Leaders love that. They don't always have time to absorb new information, but they're looking for it. They like brain gain just like everybody else. So oftentimes at the end of a coaching call, based on whatever we've discussed, I will look for articles, I'll send podcasts. I'll do it in the coaching session too, but if I really need to be a little bit more resourceful and dive deeper, I'll find maybe 3 or 4 resources that are specific to the topic that we discussed and send it over by email. And they tend to really like that. And then that next session, you can also talk through it and say what worked for you, what's helped you, what was an insight that you captured. So resources. The fourth and final one that I wrote down was, if you are contracted with an organization as a coach, get familiar with the internal resources that are available to leadership. They don't always know what's out there. HR can be your best friend, or anyone maybe on the talent development side or learning development side. Oftentimes there's continuing education, there's skills training. Depending on the organization, some media agencies have trainers internally, and they can help them with public speaking, which comes up very often with leadership. And it doesn't even have to be large scale where they're doing an organization-wide town hall. Sometimes it's just a high stakes meeting and there's 15 leaders in there and they're terrified. So sometimes if it's a media organization, they might actually have a trainer that can support them there. So getting familiar with resources is great.
Yeah, it's kind of my role in the community here is to, as a coach to coaches, is to helping them find resources or doing these programs as new resources, right, for them. Those are some things like, as a coach, even as a manager, you could be creating content internally for your organization, just like we do here. So
Yeah.
that may even help. Lisa, by the way, when you ask your questions, always helpful when you put a Q in front of them so I can see them easy. She says, when you say, "How can I help you?" often people feel grateful, but, wave off, "No, I'm fine. How are you doing?" "Fine." Keeping the pressure on themselves to fix things. How do you handle that, or how do you get past fine?
Mm.
How you doing? "Oh, it's great." Well, really? Is it really great? How do you find
Yeah.
how do you find you get past that?
Um, it's been asking those 3 questions actually has been most fruitful. I
Mm,
haven't received, I was just thinking back, had I had that response from a leader when I've asked the 3 priorities, what challenges do you have and how can I support you? Um, Instead of saying fine, what they might say is they'll reiterate things that have worked for them that you've shared out. They might say, "Oh, you know what? I've really been working on starting with the positive before I frame it up and get into a change we could make." Because maybe they have analytical high, or maybe they have maximizer or restorative. So if you could just continue to support me and make sure that I'm doing that, I'd love to continue to keep this conversation alive. So then when we're having coaching sessions, it's checking in and they're saying, "Okay, well, I just had a conversation with my employee. I remembered what you said and it worked really well, and this is what we did." So typically, if you're asking, "What are your priorities? What are your challenges? How can I support you?" They tend to either reiterate how you have helped them, or they will say, "It's going really well. If you could continue to serve me as an accountability partner, that would be wonderful." And then you can just, again, be valuable by providing additional resources or advice that continues to help them down that path. So maybe you can continue to give them new coaching questions that help them in that specific circumstance. Or there's a new article you read and you can share out some thoughts from that article. So you can pull in new information and continue to just stay on that topic.
mhm. We're going to talk about some advice for leaders, managers, if they're listening right now. We hope they are.
Mhm.
One final question before we move on to that. Mark asked, do you see a significant difference between seasoned versus new managers? So in your coaching,
Mhm.
when you're doing this, do you see a difference between the two, and maybe the pressures from those two groups?
I think it goes right back to your point made earlier. Some people have a natural ability to manage or to lead, whether they're a manager or a leader, and that just shows through. Um, and then others really struggle with it. It's more what makes a great conversation with them is their willingness to be coached. And that's probably something that resonates with all of you, whether they're new or they're seasoned. Do they have a willingness to want to be coached? Are they coming and bringing topics to the forefront? Are they engaging in that conversation, or are they just kind of sitting there and they're expecting you to take the lead and go through everything? And then
Mhm.
it can be difficult. And that's a struggle that every coach has. And we still have it here at Gallup, and we might share out, okay, this feels like I'm really having to dig. What are some other ways that you're getting through this?
Heather brings up an interesting question. I want to get to it before we move on, but she's, we get stuck in that name it, and even sometimes in our coaching with
Mhm.
leaders, we get stuck in the name it, name it, name it. How do we, using your questions, or in how do we really punch through that? I we mentioned tying results in the past to
Mhm.
talent, or even having them saying, okay, what was it about harmony, that we use that as an example? What was the talent underneath harmony that helped you get there, getting to a specific action? Jaclyn,
Mhm.
what other kind of advice would you give about punching out of name it, name it, and name it, and really getting into the application space?
Mhm. Um, Whenever I set the stage for what our coaching sessions will look like, I'll let them know the first 1 to 2 sessions. It would be really fruitful just to go through their full 34 report. Sometimes it just takes one session if they're really familiar with it. If they're very new, then it might take one and a half, 2 sessions. Um, but what I let them know is the first 1 or 2 sessions, I just want you to get really familiar with your themes. After that, know that I'll have them in front of me, and I'm going to be keeping them very top of mind as we go through the challenges that you have. If you get stuck too long sitting in the naming phase, let's say it's session 3 and you're still just calling out themes and connecting it and just saying it out loud, it can start to make it them feel like it's just strengths and it's not strengths connected to the aiming piece. So they're going, what are we doing here? So I think setting the stage ahead of time to say, let's just spend the first 1 or 2 sessions really setting you up, helping you understand what these themes are, and then we'll just incorporate it in as we go through. Um, One easy way of doing that is having a 360 or any type of stakeholder interview rolled out as well. And if you're starting the stakeholder interviews at session 1 or 2, then you tend to have all of the data, I would say, by the fourth or fifth session. So now you've gone through their CliftonStrengths themes for sessions 1 and 2. Session 3 or 4, you're starting to look at the 360, and now you can connect it to say, we've gone through your themes. And it feels a lot better for them too, because they know the help and hinders. So if someone has constructive feedback, they're connecting that with harmony or with restorative. If they see positive feedback, they might be connecting that with
Yeah.
their achiever, their responsibility. But that's how they can start to connect the pieces, and then you can move forward from there.
Getting some of that feedback from their peers, so it's not
Mhm.
just them saying it, I think is another great way. By the way, this applies to everybody, not just managers, right? This
It
is a
does.
great way, right, of getting in and kind of getting that done. I think gives us the ability to get beyond. That's kind of why we created Theme Thursday. That was Kurt's original intention, is that it could be a tool for people to learn more on their own, be able to listen to this, be able to. So you may be able to take sessions. Many coaches do this, take our sessions of Theme Thursday and have them listen to those, maybe in the same season, so they make kind of sense or whatever. But there's some great tools. You talked about having people listen to podcasts. Okay, we have leaders listening in now. Let's shift gears just a smidge. We're actually
Yes.
talking to them, Jaclyn. For leaders, what can they do? What's some advice we might have for them?
Yes. The first for leaders is study your successes. So, if you're thinking about a challenging situation that you're currently going through, when have you been successful overcoming an adverse situation previously? And you can even just broaden. what that adversity looked like for you. It doesn't have to be specific to relationships or maybe specific to something task oriented, but when you've overcome adversity, what helps you? What does that look like? There might be some prep that you were doing. There might be some mindfulness that you were doing to get in the zone. Maybe you had an accountability partner that you were talking to. But thinking about what that is, and even having your talent themes in front of you, can help you start to recognize what themes you were using or what practices you had in place, so you could implement it in the here and now. So that's the first one. The second one that I wrote down was trust your gut. Trust your gut. You're a leader for a reason, or you were placed into a management position for a reason because people believed in you. You were operating successfully. So trust your gut, but also ask yourself, what is making me feel this way? What's the why behind it? Is it that you need additional information and that's why you feel uncertain about the decision that you're making? If so, how can you gather more information to feel more well-informed? Is it just anxiety? Because we know anxiety plays tricks on our mind. Mm-hmm. And it might just be that now you're catastrophizing a situation, and that's not actually something that might happen. What else did I write down for this one?
Jaclynn, before you move on to the next one, one of the things I have found really, really helpful in the last couple of years for myself in my leadership, you mentioned anxiety. And I think oftentimes we don't recognize that for what it is. It becomes a response. We're in the midst of a firefight with our own brain. We don't know why. And I think understanding, like I began to try to get enough discipline. I have none, but it's 34. But I started getting enough discipline to recognize those moments, those anxiety moments, and call it out for what it was. Then step back and take a deep breath and go, okay, now why am I feeling anxious about this? Just that there's lots of opportunities for managers to feel anxious. Trust me, you guys are doing the hardest job on the planet. It's really, really hard. Recognizing it for what it is and stepping back and saying, yeah, I'm in a moment. Okay, let's take some deep breaths. Let's figure out why. Like, why is this causing it? Kind of takes the steam out of the anxiety, at least for me. That's been my experience of calling it out for what it is.
Yes.
Okay, I'm really nervous about this conversation because I'm afraid I'm going to fail. And then you start realizing, okay, I just need to get this done. Like for me, I just started running instead of running away from the anxiety, I began to run into it. The faster I can get this done and taken care of, the better I'll feel. And man, that's paid huge dividends. Okay. So
glad you mentioned that.
Attach it to a theme, activator, right? I have activator 5. So now I can begin to say, okay, in my talent set, when I'm feeling anxious, there are some strategies either to get an email sent out quickly, make a telephone call. Nobody calls on the telephone anymore. Make a Zoom call to, set up something, get it taken care of, right? I can begin to attach those talents directly to the actions that I have. And that's activator getting that done for me. So I think thanks for setting me up for that nice example in a callback.
Communication, talent and action.
Yeah, right on. What else?
I love that. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm really glad that you mentioned that example too, because that labeling it piece is huge. Once you label the feeling, it no longer has a hold on you. Because now you've got an explanation for where it's coming from, and it's okay.
All of a sudden, you're like, it's almost an out-of-body experience. You're like, oh, I didn't realize. Sometimes I'll even say, why is Jim feeling this way? Kind of make it a third person experience a little bit to separate the emotional piece from it and say, what's going on in Jim's world that's causing this? And just spend some time. I've also found getting in a different environment helps. So if I am in a certain situation, even a place, getting up and moving to a different place to think about it kind of changes my emotional response to it. So what else? What are the kinds of things what can they do?
That actually takes us to the next one that I had thought through and written down. And that was just give yourself some space. Give yourself space to go walk into another room, walk outside. What some parents are doing is they're taking their kids on a bike ride, and the kids are biking ahead, but it gives them that time to then think and process and reflect. So I know some parents are maybe hiding in a closet for 15 minutes just to try to get away from family and children. So give me some time, just so that you've got that think time. But having the time to just pause and reflect and giving yourself that moment is imperative, I think, to being able to even have the time to label your feelings. If you're going, you're not even taking a moment to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way?
How important are coworkers, trusted advisors in this
Mm.
equation too with leaders?
Yeah, I ask leaders who they have as constituents. Do you have a constituency? Who's in that circle? Who are your trusted advisors and colleagues, so to speak? I think it's incredibly important that they have people that they can go to, um, if they're feeling uncertain about something, because those trusted colleagues know you, and they know if you need that additional information and that's why you're antsy, or maybe you're just lacking self-confidence in the moment, and they're giving you that extra pep in your step. So I think knowing who you can reach out to, even having, a close two to five in your circle, have that little social network is really important.
Justin says, let me find his comment here really quick. He says our daily walks are under lockdown, and they're providing so important to reflect, discuss side by side, and refresh. I was
Hmm.
thinking, so say you can't even get out for like out on the sidewalk. I sometimes, when I've been really struggling with something, just go in the car, like
Mm.
sitting in the driveway, go out, sit in the car, and I could
Yeah.
put music on if I wanted to or listen to something, but that change of location sometimes is just enough to kind of push me over the edge. And then to your
Hmm.
point about accountability, this week we was the community calls for every 2 weeks. We do kind of a coaching community call. We do it via Zoom, and Austin joined us this week. And Austin has become for me one of those trusted partners, right? And I get
Yes.
really anxious before these coaching calls. Now, Jaclyn, I've been doing this a long time. Like I shouldn't be nervous,
So
but
this is your first
no, but
rodeo.
I still get amped up about him. I still get nervous. I still get a little anxious. Let's just put it that way. And Austin was so great because he jumped on. He is so faithful to be on exactly a half an hour before we start these things. And so I got a 30 minutes with Austin and could kind of talk through it with him a little bit. Now,
Hmm.
it doesn't lock me up. We were going to be fine. But it was a great opportunity, leader to leader, to have this
Yes.
conversation in this space and walk through some things and say, hey, I'm feeling this way. He knows. He's in the community with me. So I mentioned this, I think, in session 2, that I think oftentimes leaders don't create a strong enough coalition of other
Hmm.
managers, of other leaders around them, because they're in the same spot. Do you see that where they feel like they're out on an island?
Hmm. I do.
How
I
do they get
do.
off
And
an island? Like, if
yeah,
they're
it's
on an
happened.
island, how do you get off an island?
Starting to identify. So what this is actually, I'm glad this topic came up. This was helpful for one leader that I worked with that was trying to build those closer connections laterally. And so what ended up working for him was just putting it in his calendar, scheduling time in his calendar to connect with each of the various leaders that he worked with cross functionally, as opposed to just letting the team take it on to give them visibility. He started to recognize that not being more present by appearances looked like he might not want to connect with them as deeply. So we were really able to lean into his relator, say, how can you deepen that relationship with those that you're working with? And for him, what works structurally, just in terms of how he plans his day, is using a calendar. So I think that's also important, is how do you tend to prompt yourself when you need to make sure that you're getting something done, to hear what they say. For him, it was add it to my calendar. So he started just plugging in 30 minutes, drop in and say hi to such and such. So he would, and to not make it look awkward, because that might come up, is if I don't do this, how does that not look weird? Is um, where are you already connecting with them for, asking them a question, sending them an email based on your cross-functional relationship and in the work that you have, and start off with something personal to say, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? Um, how was your kids game? I overheard you talking about in a meeting the other day, and then get into that task piece. So that's what he did, and that really helped him start to build relationships with his colleagues and build that coalition that you're talking about.
When I first started at Gallup 13 years ago, my manager sat me down at one point. We used to take an internal, we called it ICE. It was an internal engagement survey that we take twice a year. Give us a score on how we're doing with our internal partners. It was like a component of a 360. It was really, really helpful. And I remember I had 7 raters, and my manager said, Jim, I need to have you have a few more raters. Like, you're not working with enough people is basically what she was saying to me. I know that seems odd as a woo and some of those kinds of things with communication, but I wasn't working with enough. One of the strategies I deployed, and I think this is super helpful for leaders, is to go in these conversations with other leaders and say, how can I help you? Like, what kind of things can I do to make your job better? And have that conversation around, I might have some specific skill sets. The magic in, by the way, the end of the story is the very last ICE, I had the most raters in the whole company, which is pretty great. So
how many
yeah,
did you have? We're all curious.
It was I don't know, 100 and some.
What?
Yeah, it's a lot. It was well, it's the nature of the role that I do. I touch a lot of
That's great.
places in the organization now through the role that I'm currently in. But I got there by asking, how do I help you? Like, how can I help you? What can I do for you? No, everybody, if you're taking, nobody wants to be taking from, right? Like, they don't want to, it's like, I need your time. Well, I'm already too busy. But if I can work with you and help you, I will get that time, because nobody turns away help usually,
Yes.
right? And not if you're in a great state of mind. So I
Such a
think,
good question.
yeah, I just think it's a great lead for both coaches. You mentioned it. Listen, we have our coaches say it. How can I help you? But I think for leaders, teaching them with other leaders, with other folks outside of their org, outside of their department, whatever, to just say, hey, how can I help you? And really establish those relationships. Hey, Kim had a great question. I think I'm pronouncing that right. When a client is dealing with an overwhelming crisis at the moment, do you apply strengths to that now, then deal with the longer term practice, homeless in this case, coaching versus social work, this idea of when they're in crisis? And I think, listen, we can apply this too when they're having, this is the idea of coaching versus counseling as well when we think about this. So we got a leader in crisis, not necessarily a work crisis. Your thoughts, what do we say about how do we help in that place?
I think we can help as coaches by looking at walking them through their next steps. Because we're not social workers, or we might not be licensed psychologists, there's some things that we can't do, but how do we get them to that licensed psychologist or to that social worker using their themes? So how can we get them to just take a deep breath and think more clearly about what's that next action they can take to feel more empowered? So I would probably have what I know I would do is I'd have their themes in front of me and then just have them highlight what is, the biggest crisis that you're focusing right now. It sounds like they would have already shared it out, and then say, as we look at your themes here, what theme do you think would best support you in that next step that you need to take? If you know them very well and they already know their themes and they're just so top of mind for them, you might just say, thinking about how you've managed crisis situations before, what does that look like? So go right back to studying a success and get them out of the weeds. And then you can hear them and hear what they're saying. And maybe you're either bringing out the themes that you think you're hearing to say, sounds like you were using activator. You just dove in and got right into the middle of that crisis. Is that something that you could do now? How could you dive in to support you in this moment in time? So I think we can use themes to help them get to that next step to get the support they need. I hope that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, I think it can be both and. Sometimes, when people are struggling, they can't listen, they can't hear, they can't think. So I think there are some circumstances where, and I think this is kind of what you said, where we need to get them help. Like, it's not a time to attach themes to actions when they're bleeding.
Yes.
Right? We need to get them medical help, right? And so, and
Yes.
I know that's an extreme example, and nobody would do that, but I think sometimes, and this kind of blends into this other question about how do you suggest you manage negative emotions from a manager who may be feeling like they're not getting enough trust. They haven't earned the respect of the trust of their team. this is super frustrating for a manager when they're working on a team that is now working against them,
Mhm.
doesn't like them, and maybe because they've been put in a difficult circumstance from the management above them, right? But
Mhm.
they're in that management pinch. So when we think about that, any advice on how to suggest those or how to kind of work on those negative emotions that may come from that situation?
Um, I 2 things come to mind. The first is what's the why? What is the why behind the team feeling like that and lashing out at the manager? Does the manager or leader need to be more transparent, even if it's just to say, I don't know what I don't know right now because I'm still waiting to hear from leadership? Is it because they're doing more telling than allowing the team to even have feedback and feel like they're valued and their opinions are heard? Are they being recognized? So as a coach, you might be able to, and that's where the 360 can also come in handy. And a 360, you could just create those questions yourself and ask for permission from the leader to go to their list of maybe 5 or 6 folks that they want you to connect with, to see, are you hearing some feedback that you could then tie into the talent themes and work with them through. The second piece that comes to mind is coming down the pipeline, I believe, in our next session, and that's with Dr. Brian Brim, who's talking about the 4 needs of followers: hope, trust, stability, and
Okay.
compassion. And that he'll, I think, being able to highlight those to a leader too, to say, do they trust you?
Mhm.
This is what trust looks like to followers. Are you offering them hope? Are you compassionate? Are you creating some stability for them in this time where it's very uncertain? So please stay tuned for that one because
Yeah.
that will be a deep dive.
So Kim follows up. She says, "Thanks. In this case, they have social workers. So your comments lead me to
Oh,
want to
okay.
help them apply themselves to the plan that they have with their social worker."
Hmm.
Man, that is a great combo. Like that,
Yes.
right? Being able to partner with the individual. I could.
Thank you for the additional context.
No, that is great because I think that's important that we, as coaches, we partner with where they're getting help, whether that's
Hmm.
emotional help or physical help. For somebody who's trying to work and is in physical pain all the time and kind of thinking about like, okay, what does that mean to them and how are they managing that? And then partnering with our healthcare to say, okay, what
Yes.
what kind of plan are you on? How are we doing this? How can we arrange your world? Of course, I'm a ranger number one, so I was thinking that terms, but how can we arrange your world to make sure we're also helping your physical therapy
Yes.
in a way that makes a very positive experience, right? Would you add anything to that?
No, I'm such a champion for integrated care. So I love that. And that's where everyone, I think, is wanting to start shifting. We see organizations are starting to have their shifts, and then society wide integrated care is really taking on
Yeah. Yeah, I know, and I think it's a
the best way
I think
to
as a
give that
coach.
holistic approach to
Right.
helping someone heal.
No, I think sorry for interrupting you
Oh
there.
no, I did the same. We both have activator. Do you see
We
what
do,
happened?
we do, we do. Yeah, but that's okay.
Point
It's
number
you just
7.
keep talking or you stop talking. You get it. You get it kinda figured out. Any other advice you'd give to leaders before we kinda wrap this up?
What else did let's see if I added anything different. Yes. So, one thing, get accountability partners. And as a leader, ask I wrote down the question specifically: how do you want me to remind you when I notice X, Y, and Z? So, as find an accountability partner and give them that question. How do you want me to remind you when I see or notice X, Y, and Z? Because we all might have those friends or colleagues that are accountability partners to us and they share out and we don't want to hear it. We already just had this conversation. Sometimes we're just being difficult. We don't want to hear it. So that actually allows permission. It's how do you want to hear me being your accountability partner? What's going to work best for you? And that triggers you too. So whenever they're asking that question, you're back in that safe zone of, oh, yeah, this is something that I reminded them to tell me about. So those were my 5 that I wrote down that I
Well,
wanted to remember.
I'll give you a little feedback. Craig says, I've listened to a lot of Called to Coach sessions. This has been the best."
Thanks,
So there
Craig.
you go, man. Jacqueline's rocking.
Yes, I'm on it.
I think on your point about accountability partners and one just kind of think one thing I've learned over the years, over the 50 years I've been doing this. I had somebody kind of trying to hold me accountable for something, and I said, yeah, but I just don't want to do it. And like, I know I need to do this. I'm not gonna though. I'm just gonna be really clear. I'm not gonna. And the response was so great. Like, okay, and I kind of needed like I needed to. It needed to be okay for me to push back. Just in a moment. It's not the right time.
Mhm.
It's not the right place. I think sometimes we get a little too crazy as we think about this accountability of holding like that now becomes a job in itself, and the person needs some grace in that. Like, okay,
Yes.
if they say they're not going to do it, okay, let's move on. And you can talk about why. Okay, well, tell me why. Tell me where that's coming from. But I think sometimes
Mhm.
that idea of accountability, then you start avoiding them because they just start grinding on you. Like, okay, here it is. Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? And you're
Yes.
like, okay, I'm just going to stop talking to you. And it, right, it defeats the whole purpose of accountability. So I think in those spaces, yeah. Would you add anything to that?
That's perfect. I think playing that devil's advocate piece is nice because you're also showing the other side. And that goes back to know who you want to be your accountability partner. Friends, family, or colleagues that know the right moments also allow for the grace and aren't just there constantly bugging you like that devil on your shoulder.
Jaclyn, if somebody wanted, as you've mentioned a couple times, the 360 concept, and that means
Mhm.
a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If folks wanted to engage with us around this idea of the 360, we don't have, that's a whole nother, and maybe we should talk about that in another episode coming up. But if they want to engage with us, what's the best way to do that? Because certainly we have some of that. We don't have necessarily a tool that we sell around that, but talk a little bit about that from a Gallup perspective.
In terms of what we do at Gallup with the
Yeah,
360s.
with the 360. Yeah.
So typically and we set this up with our coaching packages too, whenever it comes to leadership, it's something that we like to have if we have a long-term coaching relationship with them. And we will create a list of, I would say about 11 questions that we have as stakeholder interviews. And we approach the leader in that initial first intake session, coaching session, to say, do you have a list of, it can be anywhere from 8 to 10. You want at least 5. 6 is really that minimum, so you're getting a great holistic perspective of how this person is showing up. But if they come up with a list of up to 10 folks, we want them to be direct reports, want them to be colleagues that they work with closely, their supervisor, if they have someone that's above their supervisor, that's a leader, that is very helpful. But who are the people, even in different departments that work closely with them? We want those on board. So who are the 10 that are in that net of folks that you're constantly interacting with? And then we set up interviews that typically take about 20 minutes to go through those 11 questions, to ask the stakeholders that they had on that list, what are 3 words that you would use to describe
Mhm.
this leader? What do they do really well? What are some challenges that you've recognized within this person that we could support them with? Um, if you think about their growth and development, what might be most helpful to them? And I'm just throwing some loose questions out there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
typically that's what you're getting into.
Yeah. Lisa says she's surprised we don't have a tool. Let me be really clear. We have a tool that we use when we use engagements when people engage with us. So
Hmm.
if your organization is interested in kind of a comprehensive 360 process, including
Hmm.
strengths and engagement, of course they contact us. That's kind of part of what we do with them. You
Hmm.
can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we can get you hooked up with somebody to do that. I think what we have found in our work is that 360 is more than just a process. It's kind of partnering with the organization to figure out, what are you trying to do? Like, what kind of
Hmm.
problems do you have today? Where are you going? What kind of opportunities? What's your communications channels? How's your leadership hierarchy? Those all lend themselves to really some work on for us to come in and say, all right, here's the best way to do this in our
Hmm.
experience in helping them with performance and helping them with strengths, and helping them with engagement and well-being and all those pieces. So,
Hmm.
um,
And we
so
match
uh,
them into the competencies that we see,
yeah,
our 7 competencies. Whether you're an
right.
individual contributor, manager, or leader, you all have to build relationships. You're all probably developing people to some degree. and
Yeah.
so forth. So we'll look at themes connected to that too.
Kind of based on the organization, how they're set up, how they want it
Mhm.
done, so what do they already have in place, a lot of those pieces, so that we do that consulting. Again, if you're an organization that you're interested in talking about that, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We can help with that as well. Jaclynn,
Mhm.
I think we've gone through what we need to. Anything else you'd add before I kind of wrap it up? Final
No,
thought?
that was it on my end. I hope this
Mhm.
was helpful to you all. I know when I first started in executive coaching, I had been so used to individual contributor uh, coaching sessions, manager coaching sessions, that it was so different going into the executive coaching realm and what their concerns are. So hopefully this was helpful, especially if you're starting out in executive coaching, to know what they primarily come to you for. So if there's certain subject matters that you want to study up on, negotiating, you know, organizational restructuring, now you have that opportunity, and then you can feed some of those resources over to your leaders as well.
All right. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available now through Gallup Access. And if you haven't been out there in a while, go to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, log in, and then go to the upper left-hand corner, drop the menu down. You're a certified coach, all your learning is there, right? All your kits and all that great stuff is there. We've spent, most of the fourth quarter building out our resources area inside
Mhm.
of Access. So click on the resources tab, and then there's a search bar. You can find a lot of great stuff in there. We've been loading all the Call to Coach and Theme Thursdays in there as well. So if you want to find them inside Access, you can get that done. Love to have you visit that as well. Head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths for coaching, master coaching, or to become a Gallup certified strengths coach. You can send us an email, and many of you have been. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Stay up with all these events. You mentioned the one we have with Brian Brim. I think we're a couple weeks out with that. We're getting that scheduled right now. Actually, it just hit Eventbrite. So go to
Yes,
Gallup.
second week of February.
Yeah, go to gallup.eventbrite.com. Follow us, create an account and follow us. You'll get a notification every time I post something new. Listen, Brian Brim he's the man. Like, this guy is awesome. We were lucky to have him
Mhm.
on here and lucky to get his time to be able to come on. You're going to want to show up for that webcast again. I think it's in 2 weeks coming up from now. Check out Eventbrite and gallup.eventbrite.com. Make sure you get registered for that one, because I love Brian, by the way.
It's a good one, and we know more change is coming. We know people are starting to get a little anxiety because they're going to have to enter the workplace soon. So more instability is coming. So his 4 needs of followers topic's going to be really helpful
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
any of you coaching managers or leaders.
It is. And he kind of wrote the book on sales for strength. So he's a pretty great guy around that. We're excited to announce a 2021 virtual summit as well. Some of you maybe haven't signed up for that. You can do that right now. June 8th and 9th of 2021. Details are at gallupatwork.com. Join us on any social platform by searching Clifton Strengths. And we want to thank you for joining us today. We'll do a little bit, if you're listening live, we'll do a smidge of post show. But with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.